Well, the Last Dance film may be in the rear view, but if you're left with questions, we have Bob Costas, Jason Hare, Diana Taurasi, among other guests tonight, plus Last Dance bad beats one last time, and Jeremy Schaap weighs in to settle the LeBron and Jordan debate. Good luck with that, my man. We begin with the 40 seconds Bob Costas called one of the greatest sequences you will ever see in any sport. Best thing I saw today, even though it happened many, many years ago. We got our hands on the HD film version of this sequence. The full game telecast will be using this footage come Wednesday night at 9 p.m. on ESPN. You know the specifics of the situation. It's a three-point lead for the Jazz. The Bulls that year, as good as they were, 1-20 that season when they trailed by 3 inside 40 seconds. Pippen inbounds to whom else? Jordan. In any situation, I love the idea, Steve, just attack. Go to the rim quick. They get the bucket. It's now a one-point game. And on the other end, as Stockton is being guarded by Steve Kerr. Man, did Steve Kerr hit some big shots in his time with this team. Down low, Jordan sneaks up behind Malone, gets the steal. And I love this. Don't call a timeout. Don't let him get set. Make a play, see what happens. Of course, as Jordan described in the doc, the history going back with Russell. Get him on his toes, make a head and shoulder fake, bury the shot. The Bulls take the lead. The Jazz would miss the last shot. And the Last Dance ends with Jordan and the Bulls celebrating their 6th title in 8 years. And one last time, we are joined by our friends Jackie McMullen and Michael Wilbon to talk about what we just saw. And Jackie, I'll start with you. And then Michael, if you'd like to piggyback with a thought. Michael, in the end, talking about how he couldn't accept that they didn't get one last shot to run it back and try to win a 7th. What's your sense that this was truly the last dance, whether they would have tried again or not?
Well, I would bet on Scotty, Michael, and Phil Jackson anytime, anywhere. Let's start with that. But here's the problem. Phil and Jerry Krause, Scott, their relationship was untenable by that point, so there was no way Phil was going to come back. If you don't have Phil come back, then who's going to control Dennis Rodman? Even Phil had his problems down the stretch here in the 98 season. And you still had the issue of Scotty's contract and the fact that he was so grossly underpaid and was looking forward to moving on and getting his payday. So that's why I remember Jerry Reinsdorf told me 1 year before this, Scott, he said to me, I do not want our Bulls to be the Celtics of the 90s. And what he meant by that was the Celtics decided to run their big three right to the bitter end, and debilitating injuries to both Larry Bird and Kevin McHale ended that dynasty in a very unfavorable way. They didn't win another championship. So with all that considered, I understand Jordan's sentiment, and if I were him, I would always like my chances, but there were too many other things at work. There really was.
Michael, I had forgotten about Dennis going off to do the Hulk Hogan bit, although, I mean, my God, the guy went to Vegas. He had his own set of rules, as we understand. And I take into account everything Jackie just said, and there's a lot of truth to it. But Michael makes a pretty compelling case. He comes to you and says, let's run it back one more year. What's your sense of had he had the opportunity to try to convince them to give that one final last dance, what would have happened?
Well, Scott, remember that next season, 1999, was shortened.
Right.
The labor dispute.
Right.
Only 50 games. What better time for a team? Jerry Krause worried openly about aging, right? So I know it's another short offseason, but they've only got to play 50. And at that point, that works so in favor of the Bulls. And look, there is so many times where I have heard Michael say, run it again. It's like the playground. You play until somebody beats you.
Yep.
And if you're going to tell me from the charisma that we have seen over these last 5 weeks and the 10 parts of this series, that Michael couldn't get Scotty and Phil in a room and say, all right, let's go for 7. I mean, we're up there now. We're up there in Celtic land. Nobody other than Russell has done this. You mean to tell me that I'm going to bet against Michael Jordan? Jackie's right. All these things are lined up against them. First of all, they all love to line up against Jerry Krause anyway. And if they had gone directly to Jerry Reinsdorf over Krause's head, and they went to Reinsdorf like Michael did when he negotiated those 2 years, he and David Falk, I am not betting against Michael, and I know when he says I can't accept it, Scott, we've talked about this stuff for years, for 20 years when he got to Washington. We would talk about it. We talk about it now. And he says, I wanted to play. Run it back one more time. This is a basic tenet of basketball, right? You play
No
a lot.
doubt.
Scott, Jackie, you
Run it
played
back.
formerly. You guys play a lot more than I did. You run it back till you lose.
Yeah.
Michael believed that. I believed he would have convinced Scotty and Phil if he needed to.
We have spent our Sundays specifically looking at the 2 episodes we've just seen, but now the movie's over. I think from start to finish, we have the whole thing to contemplate. And Jackie and Michael, both of you guys took the class, so to speak, the first time through. But as you've watched this back, I'm curious, Jackie, what you were struck by that perhaps you didn't know, or something that you felt was significant that you had not remembered as clearly.
Well, Scott, the takeaway for me of this doc still is that moment when they're asking Michael Jordan why he had to be so difficult on all of his teammates. And he has that moment where he tears up. And I think all of us forget how hard it is to do what Michael Jordan did and to drag these people along and to have that tough love that so often pro athletes speak of. And yet we see this tender moment with Gus Lett, his beloved security guard, who became a great friend, who we now learn from this documentary, he was calling in the middle of the night, sobbing because he missed his own father. Michael Jordan was a human being with feelings. And I think because he was so tough on his teammates sometimes, we all forget the human side of him because we turn him into this untouchable icon. And I like to be reminded of that during this documentary.
There are 2 things that really stand out to me, and Jackie and I know Scott, I think we haven't talked about this, but I think we share the one where Michael looks right into the camera and he says, this is why I did what I did. This is who I am. Winning has a price.
Right.
I'll never forget that. And so that scene sticks with me. But overall, all 10 episodes, the drama that had to be navigated, that had to be managed. Oh, my God. Okay, so now people can't get past how many minutes, right, whose team it is, and all this little tiny little junk.
Yeah.
They had Rodman going off to Vegas, and you have these enormous things. The general manager telling the coach, if you go 82-0, you still can't come back. You have enormous issues, and Phil and Michael, the 2 of them really, and Scotty and Steve and guys who are around, Phil and Michael, they managed it. They didn't go to Jerry Krause. They really couldn't even stand Jerry Krause by the time they got late in the game here. I don't know that they ever really went to Jerry Reinsdorf. The commissioner didn't get involved. They didn't have all this. These guys managed it, and they won. They won all the time. Do you know today, think of how a team would become frayed if you knew of any one of these episodes, much less like every year there was something monumental. And you look at it, and I was there, Jackie was there, and you just go, oh, my God, how did they win with all this going on? And I admire it even more when I look back on it.
All right, Michael, pretend it's PTI and we got 2 minutes on the clock. That leaves a minute for each of you, and I'll start with you, Michael. With age, we get context, and that's a good thing. This allows us to look back at many things and figure out where they fit in. When you look at the totality of these runs, the 2 3-peats with what happened in the middle, what does that Bulls team represent to you?
Well, it's personal and localized to me, and I know they were a global phenomenon because I was following it and I was there. But it sort of defined the way my hometown feels about itself, even now. I mean, the first one was nearly 30 years ago, and the last one was 22 years ago. And it sort of reshaped Chicago. So there's a civic dynamic as well as the team dynamic and the accomplishment, the enormous accomplishment of winning 6 championships, no matter who you are and where you play. But, I mean, a lot of the pride of Chicago, yes, the 85 Bears were a great, great team, and the Cubs won in 16, and that's a personal highlight for generations of people. But, man, 6 championships in 8 years, I don't know that anything, and I do mean anything, inside or outside of sport, whatever arena you want to consider, sort of defines the place and the sense of pride that people have in this. Whatever people are taking away around the country or the world in watching this, can you imagine what people feel in Chicago when they relive this?
Mm-hmm. Jackie?
I'll tell you what, maybe I forgot the most obvious thing of all, that Michael Jordan is the most voracious winner I've ever seen in my life. And I laugh when I hear the announcers talk about the flu game, which we now find out, by the way, was the food poisoning game. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, who
How
were the
impressed
five
are you
guys
now?
with the
We've heard
pizza?
that rumor
Who were
back in
they?
the day, Michael. Remember? We knew about the pizza. The pizza was the smoking gun, but boy, what a difference. But you hear in that game, he plays 40-plus minutes. Michael Jordan wasn't playing. There was no load management, guys.
Yeah.
Nobody was playing 30, 35 minutes a game. He's playing 40-plus minutes in every one of these situations. And in the Utah series, he's short on every shot because he's mentally and physically exhausted. And yet,